A lot of these countries are getting closer together independently. Canada is starting to look outward to replace the business that they used to do with the US. Now, the question has always been, well, at the end of the day, you can't eliminate the US. It's 25% of GDP. Yes, that's true. Right now, you can't because it takes time, because they were all surprised. Nobody prepared for it. But eventually, they will be able to sustain. They will, in fact, they're already doing it. China right now is meeting with India. And don't forget that on Wednesday, those tariffs are hitting. I think the India tariffs are set to hit on Wednesday. So essentially, what you have is you have yourself a former quote unquote friend that is being hit with 50% tariffs, right? The second wave becomes effective August 27th. Certain goods already in transit or enter before that date may have a grace period, with the tariff applying instead for September 17th. We're getting close. There was a 25% territorial tariff on August 1st. Then there was an additional, so right now they're paying 25, now they're going to pay an additional 25%. And the grace period is up to September 17th. And do you see anybody discussing? Do you see anyone talking to India right now? From the US? No. But India is talking to China. And the idea of all this, from the US administration, they're trying to keep away these countries away from China. But are they able to do that? Are they able to sustain it? Obviously not, because they're getting closer and closer together. Now you have to understand that India, the reason why India has no choice is because they are using 30% of their oil they're getting in from Russia. So what do? You want them to stop buying oil from Russia, and then you want them to open the agricultural, because agriculture has a 39% tariff to the U.S., so that you really can't compete with, because India wants to keep its farmers busy, obviously. So you want them to get rid of their farmers and having them compete with U.S. farmers, and you want them to stop buying anything from the U.S. That is a big ask, I have to say. That is a big ask on the administration. And the reason I'm saying that is because what the U.S. is pressuring on, I believe, and it is a strategy. What they're doing is they're pressuring essentially the idea. What they're doing is they're pressuring these countries. Now, you're saying, well, I mean, there's a reason why they're doing it. They're not doing it for fun, trust me, right? They're not doing it for fun. What they're doing it is, if you take a look at the tariff, for example, that India, because what do you have with India that's going to force them to go along with you, right? Because don't forget, the tariff Indian tariff on the U.S. is about 39% for agricultural goods and 13.5% for non-agricultural goods. So I think what's happening is the U.S. is trying to go after that 39%, but that's a tough sell, because Modi needs, that's an electorate that they need, right? The farmers, they're not going to just disappear and say, you know what, we'll do business, let's open our borders to the U.S. That's a tough ask. Well, then say that's fine, but then what does the U.S. has on India? And I will tell you that they have quite a bit. Okay, India, the Russian oil that India is getting is critical. It's critical. Okay, in 23-24, Russia replaced Iraq and Saudi Arabia in India's largest crude supply. At its peak, Russian oil made up to 35 to 40% of its imports. That's a lot to give up. If tomorrow India says, you know what, no more Russian oil, the economic impact will be tremendous, right? Because obviously now you have to buy, don't forget they buy the oil at a discount. You're going to have to buy at a higher cost. Strategically speaking, India would lose a key energy buffer in global geopolitics. Sudden loss of Russian barrels would strain the global oil supply. It could gradually do it. Global prices stabilize and slowly it moves around, but not stop using it right away. That is difficult. So, and of course, to make matter difficult is Modi saying, listen, not just us are buying the oil, right? A bunch of other people buy this oil that you don't want me to buy. And that's not fair to us, for us to do it. Now, what I wanted to tell you is about what is it that the U.S. does with India. And I think that's important for you to understand. What do they need, right? This is what hold on, I can't find it. because GDP, 50% tariffs on India. Okay. India's reliance on the US, and that's what the US is banking on, right? In terms of the US is India's largest trading partner. It's larger than China, 128 billion. US companies are major investors in India, which is true. Technology, India depends on the US tech firms for its infrastructures. It depends on its defense and strategic alignments, educationals, immigration. So the India does need the US, but what the US is asking for India, which is basically give up your oil and give me access to your agricultural market, is a very big ask. Now, of course, then the alternative for India is to just say, you know what, let me get closer to, and that's going to make things even worse. Now, you would imagine the US would know that, maybe that's a little bit of a big ask for them at this point. India is less reliant on the US on the energy, agriculture, military autonomy, but the US has a huge trade deficit with India. For example, in 24, the U.S. good trade deficit with India reached approximately $45 billion. What are we trying to say here? Well, what we're saying is the tariffs, while appearing to have immediate positive spin for the U.S., stock market is up, inflation is not seen, economy is doing great. What you're not seeing, although I'm going to help, hopefully I could show you through my life, but what you need to see is that this whole, the paradigm is shifting. No, you could say that. That's because of the tariffs. No, probably not. I think this was started a while back now, where the U.S. has been slowly losing ground to other countries in terms of its dependence in industrial independence. It's only 20% of the economy, but it's an important economy. So it's been dropping very slowly. So what the U.S. has done is gone after the tariff as a mean to just shake everybody else and come and do business with me, basically, and come invest in the U.S., more importantly, so we could build on our own. But that paradigm doesn't really work because what you're asking of them is just not possible anymore. You could tax them, and you could use, the only thing that the U.S. has to use against these countries is the fact that the U.S. GDP is 25% of the world. So you're using that and you're saying, do business with me. But the other countries are saying, well, you know what? I was going to leave you anyway. Now you're just making it, you're precipitating it, basically. And specifically, I'm talking about China, India, and probably Russia now, because, what the U.S. is asking of Russia, even to stop the war itself, it's going to be very difficult to achieve. And having the Ukrainian in there trying to, get back what they had, and the Russians saying, no, I want to keep it. In fact, I want more. And you know what? I'm a war economy, so I don't have to stop, quite frankly. I keep on going, and you're not going to stop me. And who is going to stop me? The European, they have no power. The Chinese are on my side. In fact, they're helping me. And the Indian obviously need my oil. Maybe my relationship with Trump, maybe that could, but that's not going to hold, right? So what you're seeing is a world that is moving very fast, and it's changing structurally. In the U.S., for example, you're having there's a lot of issues, for example, on the unemployment figure, because there's less and less people joining the workforce. There's not enough people being born in the U.S., and because there's a clamp down on people coming into the U.S., that could have a potential impact in the future. I did a live in terms of the Social Security, and you should know that Social Security in the U.S. is paid with the people working. They didn't put the money aside for you. Just want to let you know, they didn't put the money aside until you come back and it's paid on using the payroll tax, 6% payroll tax. You pay 6%, the government pays 6%, the company pays 6%, and all that. And that's what feeds the Social Security system. But as the people in the U.S. have less and less children, and of course, what's happening is you're reducing the amount of people coming to the country. That is pressuring. And the reason we could tell this is happening is because we're seeing a very small amount of people, actually, jobs being created. The May number, the June number, July number weren't that great. But yet the unemployment rate doesn't change much. So you say, well, there's no problem. The unemployment is great. Well, yeah, the only thing is that means that there aren't that many jobs around anymore, and not enough people to get those jobs. So obviously unemployment doesn't change. So that may not be a good thing. We'll find out later on. But there's a paradigm shift there. And then, of course, a paradigm shift with all these other countries, which are, frankly, apart from Europe, that just, as you've seen, they all went to Washington trying to climb onto Trump and say, okay, maybe this is how we deal with him, by yesing him. You could see that what happened with India, they're basically saying, no, I mean, I'm going to be talking more to China. I was talking to them anyway. I am not going to stop that. And my tariffs are not going to change that much. I mean, I could do some, but I cannot do anything with the agriculture. Okay. And the U.S. obviously is going to have an issue with that. Part of my collection. And trying to spread the good word here. And I will tell you, things are moving fast, very fast. The clock and what's happening is at the end of the day, the clock is ticking for the U.S. Hopefully by now you realize, because obviously the administration does realize that, and they are trying to do something about it. But unfortunately, they realize that no one is listening, and that is a problem. Now, how long is that going to last? We shall see, right? But what I want to say is this. At some point, they're going to have a problem. At some point, this whole paradigm is going to... It's not for Monday morning, but the way I'm looking at this thing is I see them all moving very slowly, and it's changing, right? They're not listening to you. They are not listening to you. They're not. They're doing business with themselves. Right now, the Chinese are meeting with the Indian. Of course, you're going to say, well, what do I care? I'm in the U.S. How is that going to impact my job? Well, it will impact it, right? Because you're losing. The BRICS is getting closer and tighter together. And at some point, once they are close enough and they don't need the dollar to trade, then they don't need the U.S. And then they're closing the doors and they say, thank you. Right. And right now, the only people that are, as you could see, the only people that are really truly talking to the U.S., who's talking to the U.S.? It's really the European. They came over and they say, come on, let's do something. The only problem is when they come over, what they do is they are patronizing Trump, literally sitting around that table and say, you're great, this is fantastic, we're going to do business. And he says, yeah, no, you're great, no, you're great, no, you're great. Because they want him to get in there, and they want the U.S. to get between Ukraine and China, but between Ukraine and Russia. But the U.S. can't do that either. So it looks like the options are closing in. The only thing that the U.S. has playing is the fact that it has a tremendous amount of buying power. And it's powerful right now. By using it and coercing that way, and you could see, I mean, maybe it works at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, don't forget, we're talking $4 trillion in tariffs. So it depends. You have to pick your battle. You have to decide what's going to work and what's not going to work. Now, for example, yourself, if you're working in industries, then yes, that's going to be a great deal, because right now, a lot of money is coming to the industries. For example, look what they're doing with Intel, right? Basically, what they want to do, they're saying the government is going to buy 10% of Intel. It's not buying; it's actually using the money that the Intel was getting anyway from the Biden era, and it's going to say, well, it's not going to be a grant; it's going to be equity. We want that money in. So you have that. You got that going for you on the Intel side and on the corporations trying to. So money is going to come in, and at the end, money has to come into the industrial sector, because they realize not so much that the industrial sector is getting weak, because, like I said before, the U.S. is slowly, the clock is ticking for the U.S. So, but that's okay, because they knew this was good. That was a risk they took originally by exporting all the jobs, right? And the U.S. becoming more efficient, more service economy, and let the other people build the stuff. The only thing is, as they realize that, no, what's happening is not only we're making less stuff, and they're making it for us, but we are dependent on them. And they may not be our greatest friend anymore. So what's the next step after that? Well, they could stop reducing your access to what they're producing and that you need. No, but that wouldn't happen. It's happening right now with rare earth mineral in China. They are reducing the amount of rare earth mineral that are coming in from China. They're not closing it completely, but they're just making sure that especially the magnets, you're not really getting the magnets, because they don't want you to have magnets, because the magnets are used in weapons. So overall, the same way, China buys what the West bans, which is, they're buying Iranian oil, they're buying Russian oil, right? Not this ban for them, but I will tell you that even the European are buying oil, right? Basically, we have Europe. And how do they do it? Well, basically, countries under embargoes often use rare amount of shippings, finance, and trade practices to keep the oil flowing from China, for example. They're using shadow tanker fleet, blending oil. They're doing a bunch of things. The point is that oil is coming in. Now, they're doing business with each other already. And that's a worrying sign that All these countries are dealing with each other, they're selling with each other, and they're not listening to the US anymore, and not that much. Don't forget, on August 27th, making sure I get my date here, yes. On August 27th, 50% tariffs on India. 50% tariffs. Do you hear Modi coming over like the European? Sitting at his desk. He's sitting at the Oval desk, where the European was sitting in front of him and the president sitting behind. Do you see Modi there? Do you see the Indian there? They're pissed. The Indians are very upset. Now, you shouldn't be surprised that they're upset because you're going to tax them 50%, right? You shouldn't be surprised because you're going to tax them 50%. The only issue is, why are you targeting India at 50%? Because I want them to stop using the oil from Russia, because I want them to do more business with us, because I want them to keep away from China. But I don't believe that all these things get done just by that 50% is going to resolve everything. I think for you to get this thing done that you're trying to do, like stop using the oil, get closer to us, right? What you need to do is you really, instead of going after the Indian students that are trying to come to this country and looking at their social posts to limit, because a lot of Indian students come to this country, maybe you need to negotiate, you need to talk, you need to spend more time, but they don't have that kind of time, and that's what they're using. This coercive technique. And I think what's happening in this process, you're getting them closer and more farther away from you. And that's going to be a problem long term, because, how do you bring these people back? I mean, India, and India is an important aspect because it's it's obviously part of BRICS, but you probably already lost China. Russia, there's nothing you could do with them. You're not doing trade with Russia. The only one that's kind of still, quote unquote, liked you was India. But the pressure they are under is humongous. And how long is that going to last? That is going to be the question.